Okay, so how's everything going by you guys?
Yeah, everything's going well. We want to make
Yeah,
sure you can hear us okay. You can hear us okay?
yeah. I put my earphones in. I couldn't hear it at first, but my earphones are in. So
Okay. All right.
yeah, so we're again we're in this process of getting closer and closer to Pesach. Um, when you think about the idea of God telling Moshe that hey, this is going to be the beginning of the counting of the months and the seasons. That was literally yesterday, like 3,000 years ago, that interaction between Hashem and Moshe. And so God tells Moshe, 10 days from now, you're going to collect a lamb. So we're in between that first conversation and the first action, right? And so, like, we just have to be like in aware that literally God, 10 days, right? And we know about the 10 sphirot, right? And we know how the light force manifest, through the process of 10 vessels, right? 10 different vessels that express different aspects of God's light. And so we're building in that reality of that perfection, right? And that perfection led us to this process of getting the lamb, right? And going out and collecting a lamb for the marketplace, something that we know that the lamb is something that the Egyptians worshipped. It's like equivalent to like if you could go to the store and buy like money and success, and influence. If you could go to the store and buy those things, and and God told you to sacrifice that, sacrifice status, sacrifice, these different aspects that you feel are making you secure, making you feel you are important. And he tells you to sacrifice those things, right? And so, now, we're dealing with that experience, right? Of being able to look at ourselves and look at our lives and say, like, what is it? What does the lamb represent for me? Right? What is that? What is the lamb? What is that aspect of God wanting us to sacrifice the God of our generation? What does that mean for me? Right? So, anyways, it's just a reflection point over the next 10 days. Is a very powerful time. Very, very powerful time, right? Not just because of that, but because, and that's a very important point. We may have said it before, but you could say it, you could never say it enough. But it's important to acknowledge that the fact that in the Torah and Judaism, we do not worship the days, right? Oh my God, this happened. It's crazy. No, rather the day is an expression, or what happened is an expression of the light that's available on that day, or during that season, or during that time period, right? So the light of Pesach is not that we're saying, "Oh my God, this time we're memorializing, what happened with our ancestors and that and this." This is reform and conservative, right? In Orthodox Judaism that's influenced by an aspect of the depth of the Torah, which is Kabbalah, we understand that light, the 15th of Nisan, the month of Nisan in itself is a powerful cosmic alignment that allows what we call an open miracle to manifest. Right? So that's what the month of Nisan is. That's what's going on. Now, it so happened that, so many thousand years ago that this tremendous experience where a group of people who were slaves transform their social status in planet Earth to being the leaders, right? Very similar to Yosef being in prison and then becoming, viceroy, right? So that dramatic shift in reality is what we, are connected to in this month. Okay, so that being said, we're still in this process of leadership with Lord Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs and blessed memory, and we're in this process, and so now we're at the end of the book of Exodus, right? We're in the process of Vayehi, right? And so we want to understand what that means, and we're going to go into it, and basically we'll be finishing off the book of Genesis, which is a precursor for us to continue to learn this series of leadership in the book of Exodus, which is connected right now because we're in that process of Pesach. So it works out beautifully. All right, so let's do this. So we want Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs to join us in the share, help us have clarity. Okay, so Vayehi. Okay, okay, so surviving failure, right? Vayehi, right? So it sounds like this. he said, the book of Genesis ends on a sublime note of reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers. His brothers were afraid that he had not really forgiven them for selling them into slavery. They suspected that he had merely delayed their revenge until his father died. But after Joseph's death, they expressed their fears, but Joseph insisted. So this is what Joseph says to his brother when his brothers are kind of like worried that. So he says, "Do not be afraid. I'm in the place of God." He says, "I am in the place of God." Like asking a question, like rhetorical. He says, "You intend to harm me, but God intended it to be good, to accomplish what is now being done, and the saving of many lives. And so then, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. He said, "This is the second time he has said something like this to them. Earlier, he spoke similarly when they first disclosed that the man that they thought was the Egyptian viceroy, was it the Panas, Tasad, no, Panai, whatever. It means hidden face, the hidden face, whatever. Anyways, but it says like this. He says, it was in fact, he said, it was in fact their brother Joseph, right? So they thought the viceroy was Joseph, right? And I mean, they thought the viceroy was viceroy, but it turns out the viceroy was Joseph. And so Joseph says to them, "I am your brother, the one who you sold into Egypt. And now do not distress and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me here ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plunging and reapings." I guess it's like, whatever, crops, sharecropping type stuff. She says, "But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. And so then it did so then it was not you who sent me here, but God." And I think that's a very powerful thing. These two aspects. It's just this idea of the, like, especially during this time, is to think about, like, this idea of forgiveness, right? This idea of forgiveness, and to realize that a lot of the pain that we've experienced, in our life, and disappointments have been there to push us in a particular direction with a certain attitude, right? And I'll say, like, when I was in LA, I was in this relationship with this girl, whatever, we were engaged. It didn't work out, and I was really, like, heartbroken about it. And we were going to move. She was the one who really got me excited to come to Israel. I was always into it per se, but she really got me in the mindset of, like, you could go to yeshiva, you could be, big Torah scholar. She grew up very religious, and anyways, I was devastated. Right, it just didn't work out. The way everything happened, it was just crazy. It was really negative. But the point is, I still end up still going further and coming to Israel. And the thing is that when I came to Israel, in retrospect, I was able to look at it and say, when I came to Israel, I was coming off a congressional run, for U.S. Congress. I was like the nominee for the Republicans in California. And for that, working in the private sector, having a lot of success, and I was just, I had a certain aspect of self awareness, about myself. You know what I'm saying? And I realized in retrospect that whole disappointment in that relationship was there to get me in a place where when I came to Israel, I was just like humbled, and I just wanted to connect to God. I just felt alone. I felt abandoned. I felt like, I did this whole conversion. I'm by myself. I'm in this whole world, and then this whole thing that I really had high hope for doesn't work out, right? And you're there, and then now you have to come to this new place. You don't have to, but you choose to. And so you come to this place, and it's just you and Hashem, and you really don't know anybody here, and you're just like, "Hey, God, I'm here." But the point is, I wouldn't have been in that place if it wasn't for that disappointment, right? Now, I could look at the things that happened and whatever, and who was involved, all these types of things, and say, "Oh, you did this, you that," or I could say, "Look what's happened." Look what's happened. Look what has happened in my life. Look at all the things that happened. Look at all the things that transpired by me coming to Israel and being humble. Me wanting to connect to the Torah. Me saying the only thing I have is the Torah, right? And so, like that innocence, that purity came through disappointment, right? Where I could point the finger at a bunch of people, right? So the point is it's saying that we have to look at our lives and say, like, you know what? Even in our pain, right? That goes back to this concept of living with meaning, right? That we talked about yesterday. Was this idea is just being able to really look comprehensively at our lives and be able to say, hey, you know what? That was really painful, but it directed me to where I'm going. And I think that's what Yosef is communicating with his brothers. He said, this is a critical moment in history of faith. It marks the birth of forgiveness, the first recorded moment at which one person forgives another for a wrong that they have done. But it has also established another important principle, the idea of divine providence. History not he says history is not, as Joseph Heller calls it, a trash bag of random coincidences blown up in the wind. It has a purpose, a point, a plot. God is at work behind the scenes. There is divinity that shapes our end. Like Hamlet, through Hugh now, through Hugh, it says through, no, rule Hugh them how we will. All right, well, let me figure this out. God, this is annoying. I do stuff like this. All right, so let's try to figure this out. All right, so he's kind of going on what we were just talking about, right? He's saying that this idea of there's nothing random, there's no coincidence, right? And this is a really important idea going into Pesach, right? Because we're there to establish order, right? And one of the things that does not allow order is the perception that things are random, right? Things are not random. Everything has a divine order. The future reality, right? We learned Rabbi Shalai, Kabbalah, one of the masters. The future reality is already there, right? It's already there. So we have to go through tikkunim to get there, right? So nothing is by random. He says Joseph's greatness was that Joseph's greatness was that he sensed this. Nothing in his life nothing in his life he now knew had happened by accident. The plot to kill him, the sale as a slave, the false accusing accusations from Potiphar's wife, his time in prison, and his disappointing hope that the chief butler will remember him and secure his release. All these events may have cast him into the ever deeper depth of despair. Turns out, in retrospect, to be necessarily steps in the journey that eventuated his eventual becoming the second in command in Egypt and the one person capable of saving the whole country, and as well his whole family, and starving from the years of famine. So, the thing is, when we talk about this idea of Joseph saving, he didn't just save Egypt. He saved the whole world. The whole world was reconstructed through this famine, and Joseph acted in a way that created a mechanism that the world was constructed in such a way at a physical level that it allowed the Jewish people, Am Israel, the Israelites, to survive long enough in Egypt to be redeemed by Moshe. It was through this order, right? He's the one who put the brothers through it. He's the one who had to correct his brothers. He was acting as, in a way, like a shliach, a messenger of God, like an angel. And he was putting his brothers through the very thing to make them fight for themselves so the future generations will be unified and they wouldn't be separated. He said Yosef had in a double measure one of the necessary gifts of a leader, the ability to keep going despite opposition, envy, false accusation, and repeated setbacks. Every leader who stands for anything will face opposition. This may be a genuine conflict of interest. A leader elected to make society more equitable will most certainly win the support of the poor and and I guess you could say the animosity of the rich. That's not what it says, but I'm just saying it. He says one elected to reduce the tax burden will do the opposite. He will. It cannot be avoided. Politics without conflict is a contradiction in terms. He says any leader elected to anything, any leader more loved or gifted than others will face envy. Rivals will say, "Why isn't it me?" That is what Korach thought of Moshe and Aaron. It is what the brothers thought about Joseph. And when they saw the father love him more than he did them, he says when they saw his brother love him, he said, and it was Antonio Sirius thought about more gifted Mozart according to Peter's. Come on, why is he always bringing these sources, guy? Like, all right, I get it. It's British. It's British stuff. You know what I mean? But anyways, he's using example envy, leadership envy, being a leader and understanding that you will have opposition. There's no way to get around it, right? And so he used the different examples of Korach and Moshe and Aaron and Joseph and Joseph and his brothers, and he brings this Antonio person, I guess, who was a composer, and he was jealous of Mozart, and it was in some play by Peter Shafton. Okay, I get it. It's the English stuff. Anyways, as for false, I mean, no, I'll respect Rabbi Sachs, just all respect, but I'm just saying, like, I'm American, you're talking about plays. He says, as for the false accusations, they have occurred often enough in history. Joan of Arc was accused of heresy and burned at the stake. The quarter century later, she was pontifically declared innocent by official court of an inquiry. More than 20 people were put to death as a result of the Salem witch trials in 1692 to 1693. Years later, as their innocence became to be perceived, a priest present at the trial, John Hale, admitted such a darkness of that day that we walked in the clouds and could not see our own way. He said the most famous false accusation in modern times was the trial of Alfred Dreyer, a French officer of Jewish descent accused of being a German spy. The affairs rocked France between the years 1894 and in 1906, before Dreyfus was finally acquitted. He said setbacks. He says setbacks too are part of the life of the most successful. J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, was rejected by the first 12 publishers she sent it to. Another writer of a book about children suffered 21 rejection. That book was called The Lord of Flies. We read that in high school. I mean, was it junior high we read that? He says, and it was author William Golding was eventually rewarded Nobel Peace Prize for literature. In his famous commence address at Stanford University, the late Stephen Jobs told the story of three blows of fate that shaped his life: dropping out of university, being fired from Apple, and the company he founded. In the beginning, and he says, and being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Rather than being defeated by them, he turned them into creative uses. For 22 years, I lived close to Abbey Road, North London, where the famous pop group recorded their first hit. Talk about the Beatles. At the time of their audition, they performed for a record company who told them that the guitar bands were on the way out. The verdict on their performance in January 1962 was the Beatles have no future in show business. This is the Beatles. Could you imagine? He says all this explains Winston Churchill's great remark that success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. This is amazing. It's so true. I don't know about failure. I don't see myself as failure. I see myself as going through different processes, and some have more pleasure and some have less. And it may be that what sustains people through repeated setbacks is belief in themselves or sheer tenacity or lack of alternatives. He says what sustained Joseph through was his insight into divine providence. A plan was unfolding whose end he could only dimmingly discern, but at some stage he seemed to have realized that he was on one of the characters in a far larger drama, and that all the bad things that had happened to him were necessary if he intended outcome was brothers. It was not you who sent me, but God. his willingness to his willingness to this willingness to let events work themselves out in accordance with the providence. This understanding that he says this understanding that we are the best and no one other than co-authors of our lives allowed Joseph to survive without resentment about the past or despair. And in the face of the future, trust in God gave him immense strength, which is what the leader needs when he is to dare greatly. He says, whatever malice other people harbor against leaders, and more successful they are, the more malice there is. And if they say you intend to harm me, but God intended it for good, they will survive. Their strength is their strength intact and their energy undiminished. Thoughts, reflections.
Yeah. I tend to look at this up first. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. This is really really told because this really gets you in the right mindset. In moving forward and also setting goals and building making new decisions. Because I look at life from the standpoint that all everything in my life was always leading to, and I kind of think like this: every event in my life was leading to the moment I'm in right now. You know, every single moment. And I think those events they cater to specific events that may transpire in my life, or things that I may need to accomplish or do. But I believe that everything builds into your character or your resilience and how you perceive, how you perceive life. And if that's the case, in knowing that everything is already by design, everything has been orchestrated, instead of looking at the negative things that I perceive to be negative in my life, like you mentioned, like you mentioned with the in the relationship that you were in, that relationship, that some would look at as a failure, but it wasn't a failure at all. It was fuel. It was fuel to prepare you for the journey that you were going on. You know, and I think to be aware of that and to acknowledge that in your life shows leadership. Leaders, they must have that. Leaders have to have this particular character trait in them, that they can look at events in their lives and not see them negatively, but rather to see them or choose to see them in a positive way. Because you can look at anything in a negative light, but if you look at it and say, you know what, um, I choose not to look at this as a failure, because the only time I look at failures is if I don't do something, if I fail to actually try, if I fail to try to do something, and then there's also a key there. I remember we used to there was an old saying a long time ago, but if the devil ain't fighting you, then you ain't serving God. That these are different things that dealing with the oppositions and the envy and so forth. So that can also be a good sign that you're on the right track.
Yes, exactly. You brought a really good point that I want to emphasize and really think this out a little bit, which is the concept of like, where does the Torah ever talk about the concept of failure, right? And the concept of a failure, like I mean, like say for example, we we just had Purim, right? And Purim is about Haman and Mordecai, and Haman was this negative guy, right? But Haman's descendants became huge rabbis, right? And so it's just kind of like this idea of failure is like it's an impossibility in the spiritual reality because we're just going through tikkunim. You could do it the easy way or easier way, or you could do it the hard way. Either way, God loves you and he's going to bring you through a process. So this idea of failure, I just don't understand how it fits in. I know in a capitalist society, it's based off of acquisition, or some type of acceptance, right? You're in the marketplace, so you have to do business, right? So you either made the relationship or you didn't make the relationship. You either made the sale or you didn't make the sale. You either made the product or you didn't make the product. You know what I'm saying? Like that element that's their world, but in the spiritual world, there's a chet. There's a such thing as a disconnection. Like some people may translate that as sin, but chet means to disconnect. So I can do an action and disconnect me from the light force of the creative system of the universe, and that's going to be painful, even if it presents itself in pleasure. But the concept of failure, we have to let that go. That does not exist. I mean, maybe for the other nations it does. You know what I'm saying? For us, we have moments of disconnection. Unfortunately, some people may even have a lifetime of disconnection, right? And they'll just have to go through a process to get there. God forbid a person has to be reincarnated as a plant, right? To learn basic principles and build those things all the way back up. But I'm saying either way, they're going to get there, right? And we're all going to be resurrected. We're all going to go through this process of the perfection of the soul, right? So there is no failure. There's just a process of getting to the destination. And sometimes that process it has an aspect of pain, and sometimes it has immense pleasure, and sometimes it has a combination of both, right? And sometimes it's 30-70, and sometimes it's 49-51. I mean, it's just saying it's a whole system, and everyone's life is differently. But we cannot look at anything in our life as a failure because that is saying that we're God. That is saying that we're saying that we understand what this meant for us in our life. I go into a place and somebody comes and I take on this business partner, and business partner comes in and says, "Hey, you know what? This person steals this money from me, God forbid, or this person, messes up all these things, and I lose all this money." You don't you think God will let me lose money that was good for me? You think God would put me? Oh no, but if the way I see the world, I should have made more money based off of my decision because that was my intention when I went into this. And you ask the person, did you pray to God to protect you? Yeah, of course. But you lost money. Yeah, I'm angry. God, how could you be protecting me and making me lose money? So that's what I'm saying. So the point is just saying, so there's no such thing as failure. There's just a process of getting there. And letting that go, it allows us to let go of the system that wants to make us feel like we're impure on their standards. Failure by them really means, okay, you're not as pure as you would be if you didn't fail, right? But that's their standard. That's not God's standard. So, anyways, I really appreciate that point that you brought out. But we got to, in association with what you're saying, we really got to change our way of thinking, because we have to realize that we live in a capitalist society, right? Like when people walk around, they look at what outfit you're wearing and they understand where your social class is based off of that presentation. So that tells you about the psychology of how they have to see themselves, right? If you're looking at this person this way, this is how you see yourself. So if you objectify yourself in this way, how do you connect that to God? You now became God yourself. Oh man, that was a failure. What do you mean? How do you know it's a failure? What do you mean? How do you know it's a failure? Oh man, I lost this money. This relationship didn't work out. What? So what? So you're saying God doesn't have a plan for you? He gave you life this morning. He doesn't plan for you. Anyways, we'll continue on. Let's keep pushing it. We'll do tomorrow. We'll keep doing tomorrow. We'll keep pushing all the way through the 15 days. You know what I mean? So we'll just keep pushing. And any point you want to add on that then?
No, this was really good. Told on, Rabbi.
All right, so we continue on. We're going to keep pushing through the 15 days. Leadership, leadership. And then we got to start getting to somewhat of the different laws around Pesach in the 8 days. But we got time on that. We got a little bit of time, but I just want to really stay in this focus of leadership in the aspect of like, it seems like the key to leadership so far since we finished this book of Exodus, the key to leadership that I heard echoed throughout this book is finding ways to become safe with yourself. Because leadership is just being yourself. It's not being anyone else. It's just being yourself, right? And so
That's right.
that process of getting there, that's what we want to use this light, this opening in the cosmos, this energy that exists in the universe right now. We want to direct that and say, ask Hashem to burn away the false perceptions that we've gained in this society about who we are, to be able to bring our place that we could create that